Every day, thousands, if not millions, of dog owners take their furry friends for a round of exercise and companionship. But this little brown girl belongs to Wendy, a retired American librarian living in Mexico. She has a special mission, giving Wendy an exciting tour of the town. Their walk is unique because Wendy has multiple sclerosis and rides a Segway. With this device, she can keep up with her dog Peanut on the streets and sidewalks of the city. They really enjoy the wide Malecon walkway running beside the Sea of Cortez. It's a place for high-speed energy running or just moseying along with friends in conversation. Peanut gets a workout and Wendy gets physical and social stimulation. Peanut is a social animal too and has lots of chances to meet and greet other dogs. It's not all play though, for the Segway is sufficiently nimble to allow some shopping. Otherwise, walking through the stores is not an option for Wendy. One of the attractive features of the Malecon is its access to the beach, and this off-road model of Segway is totally at home and reliable in the soft sand.
My multiple sclerosis symptoms started in California 2002 when I was in my late 40s. I'd occasionally just trip when I was running, occasionally just trip and fall when I was out jogging in the morning, and then it went on to moving to the Caribbean, and I didn't really have any symptoms for about a year and a half. But when we moved 2 years later to St. Kitts, I started having the symptom, and then I would have been 49, the symptom of leg weakness. When I walked about 3/4 of a mile, my leg would start to be very weak. Then when we moved to St. Martin, which would have been about 2005, and I was in my early 50s at that point, I would do a run in the morning. I'd run on the beach, get in the water, swim, and then run back to my starting point. And I have gradually found that after the swim, I couldn't complete the run. I had to walk. And then a few months later, it got to the point where Bobby had to come get me in the car because I couldn't really even walk after that point. My leg was too fatigued. So at that point, I was working at a medical school. I was the library director at various medical schools in the Caribbean and working with doctors. And I was going to the States for a library conference. And the doctors suggested I go see a neurologist, which I did. And that was when I was I was diagnosed at 53 with relapsing, remitting MS. And that was, we had just purchased a boat 6 months prior to that with the intention of leaving the Caribbean and sailing home to our house in La Paz, Baja, Mexico. So, which is what we did, which worked out just fine. The boat was a catamaran, and it's a confined space, so any trouble I had walking, boats are small enough, I was able to hold on to the walls or the exterior of the boat, just like most people actually need to do when a boat's moving. So it worked out fine. I wasn't able to handle the sails. My husband did that, but I was the captain, so that was easy enough for me in my physical condition. And it was a nice environment because we were always on the water, and it allowed me to do a lot of swimming, one of my favorite things to do. So we started our voyage from St. Martin to La Paz. The fantasy was when we bought the boat that we'd sail it home through the Panama Canal, drop anchor in the La Paz Bay, anchor, and then walk the 2 blocks to our house. So that's what we did. Used to walk to a yoga class. It's a little over a quarter mile from our house, do the yoga class, and then my husband would come pick me up because I wasn't able to walk back. But that ability to walk gradually declined over the last 8 years, and now I'd say I'm rather hard-pressed to walk a couple blocks. My ability to walk has definitely deteriorated in the 8 years that we've been back home. After I was first diagnosed, I would wake up in the morning and think, oh God, that was just a bad dream that I was diagnosed with MS. And then I'd wake up a little more, I go, no, it wasn't a bad dream, it's real. So that was one thing I remember experiencing. So I just began to think that I didn't have relapsing remitting MS from what I'd read, because that's involves having episodes where you, for example, have weakness in your leg, but then you recover. And this was just a continuous, slow progression. So I went back to the States and went to the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale and got a second opinion and was told that I had MS, but I had progressive MS. And that made more sense to me because it had been a slow deterioration. At this stage, my MS has progressed so slowly. I think I'm just as well off just taking my chances. I just take a thyroid medication because I am hypothyroid and I have hypothyroidism. And I take something for fatigue, which is Motadial, which is living here in Mexico is something you can buy over the counter without a prescription. But that's all I take. Besides my MS, I'm very healthy. I really don't have any problems other than having what they call drop foot. So it could have been worse. Think of Laika. She was sent up into space with only 3 days worth of food and no way to get back home. And so I literally often think of Laika and think it could have been worse. So I think there's a lot of hardships people have to endure. I try to look at life as positively as I can. That's been something that's been with me since childhood, because I feel like I'm lucky just to be alive and wake up every day. Life is like a circle, and there's always someone in front of you and there's always someone behind you. I do have a friend here in La Paz that also has MS, and that's helpful too. So we have a little mini support group, I guess that's a 2-person group. So it's helpful.
When she was diagnosed with this, I realized that at first I was just in denial. And then the more it advanced, the more I realized that I was going to have to be, in some ways, her strength, just as she's become my strength. And through this is a whole long process, but through the whole thing, I think we've developed a stronger relationship. And it's not necessarily because of the MS, but Wendy's sort of my guru. She's really taught me a lot about life and about a lot of things.
It would be a very different story if he wasn't here to help me. Fortunately, he loves to cook, and I like to do anything that involves water, so I'm good at doing the dishes. But yeah, he's always there to help me. He's very creative in being a mechanic, and he looks at what I'm going through and has been very helpful in developing systems that are improving my life. He suggested about 6 years ago that I get a Segway, and at the time I had no idea what a Segway was. I looked at it on the internet and saw it was very expensive, and I was afraid of getting one and then having it be a failure, that if I couldn't ride it. So I was worried about that. But I thought finally, well, if I can't ride it, he can ride it. So we went ahead and got one. Okay, I can get my good leg on it, and then with I use a cane to walk, so I get my good leg on and then push myself up with my cane. And once you have any weight on it at all, it has a self-balancing mechanism, so I can spend as long as I needed getting my weak leg on. The Segway has changed my life. I would encourage people that have any kind of disability, if you can stand, you want one, because it's given me so much independence, which is something when you have a disease like this, you lose your independence in many ways. And I now have the freedom to walk the dog. We live just a couple blocks from a shopping area. I can take it shopping, and the Segway I have is the all-terrain, so I can take it on hiking trails. We've gone with friends on hikes in the mountains. I've gone to botanical gardens. Right here in La Paz, I can take it on the beach. It goes on the sand. So yeah, it's really changed my life so much for the better, because I can really get out and enjoy myself without having to ask well, I can drive, but it's just nicer to be able to leave the house like a normal person would, be able to just get it and walk to the bakery 2 blocks away or walk down the hill. Now it's history. I've been riding it for 6 years, and I'm fearless on it, pretty much. And then it's been a big boon for Peanut and I, because we get to walk twice a day on it, and she gets lots of exercise, which she loves. Peanut's my dog. One day I was home, and we'd just been out to lunch, and I'd ridden the cycle back to the house, and Bobby was walking home with his brother. And he came into the house, and he had this thing, and I said, "What is that?" And it was Peanut. She was probably about 4 months old. She was disproportionately long. She has some dachshund in her, I'm sure. And he told me that he'd been walking home, and let's see, a block and a half from our house here, he felt something on the back of his leg, and it was Peanut, or it was this little dog licking him. And so he picked her up and carried her around to about 10 houses and asked people, is this your dog? Do you know this dog? And everybody said no. And finally he asked 2 teenage girls on the street, do you know who owns this dog? And one of the girls said, you. So we brought her home, and she's been a huge part of my life. She's going to be 8 on July 5th. And Bobby always laughs at me because when she was first here, he says I gave her a bath every day for about a week, and finally he said, you're going to wash all the hair off that dog. And I think I did it because, well, one, I just was so immediately attached to her, but she was so small that I could, when I was drying her, I'd do it in my lap like this, and she'd just fall asleep, and it was just part of the bonding process. So Bobby and I went from being a couple to a family when we got Peanut, because it just added a really great, rich dimension to our relationship. Well, one of the big things I was looking forward to when I retired was hiking. I love hiking, and especially here, well, everywhere. But because we live in Mexico now, living in the desert, I'd look forward to hiking in the mountains and here in Mexico, and discovering springs and pools to swim in and things like that. So I really miss hiking. I really don't want to travel anymore because it's not fun for me. Fortunately, I traveled a lot when I was younger. But my idea of traveling is getting to a location and spending the whole day walking, and I just can't do that anymore. I have found I always have to live on water to be happy. So here I'm able to swim in the sea, which I love. Actually getting into the water has gotten to be a little bit more of a challenge. Bobby's been very, very good at picking up and doing things that I'm not able to do, so I really have a pretty ideal life. My main responsibilities are walking the dog and swimming and doing the dishes, so. Overall, I prefer swimming in the ocean, but in the ocean you're dealing with things like waves and current and various natural elements which are a distraction from just focusing on your stroke, which I like to do too. I'm always trying to improve my stroke. And MS is a very humbling disease. I remember when I first was diagnosed and dealing with MS, I had challenges getting out of the water, and a friend would, like hold my arm, and I'd walk out, and then it's gotten to the point where I pretty much crawl out of the water now, and I used to be very shy, actually, and you just finally realize, I have to do this, so I'm going to crawl if I have to, and I do. So the amazing thing is what I do when I swim in the sea is there's a rock jetty at the beach I like to swim at, so I can walk out with my canes. I walk with 2 wooden canes, and then I stick the canes in the rocks and swim off. Yeah, so sometimes it involves crawling out to get to my canes, and a lot of times the people in Mexico are so gracious that usually somebody will come over and ask if they can help me, and which is very nice. And one day this gentleman said to me in Spanish, he said, I like how hard you try. And I had always had the mindset that this is, they're looking at, there's this geeky girl over there, and he made me realize that people go, wow, look at her, she's fighting for it. And so it was good for my self-confidence to know I didn't just look like a geeky girl. In La Paz, we're fortunate. We have an Olympic-sized pool. So I swim there 3 days. I used to swim, 3 to 5 days a week at the pool. So that's a little bit easier to get in and out of for me than the sea. So, but the sea is really exciting to swim in. It's much more exciting, but I'm kind of a freak about knowing how far I swam, so I can count my laps, and to keep myself motivated, I keep a little journal and record the days I swam and how far I swam to help motivate me. I mean, even when I didn't have a handicap, I loved swimming because there's just a wonderful feeling of being submerged in water. I think I'm working out as much as anybody does in terms of my swimming anyway, so that's got to burn some calories. But I'm sure I've lost a lot of muscle mass too, which means I'm burning fewer calories. But you know, that's the funny thing too about MS. I think a lot of times you think, oh, that's the MS, but I think the reality is a lot of the symptoms MS people have are also just part of the aging process. I have to really consciously remind myself to kick, but the reality is they do very little to propel myself forward. So, but you know, other than that, yeah, I mean, I am a strong swimmer. So even though I don't use my legs, I can pretty much hold my own against other swimmers just using my upper body. When I'm in the water, even though I feel like I'm a slow swimmer, I am a slow swimmer, I don't have a disability. I'm able to move just pretty much like anybody else. So when I get out of the water, as I'm making that transition, I'm reminded that, you know, it's now movement is a challenge. You know, I don't really think of it, but that's when I do it. But that's what's going through my mind. And then, yeah, it kind of hits home when I have to crawl out of the pool, and people usually, a lot of times, will come over and say, "Can I help you out?" And so it hits home that, yeah, I'm back on land again, and my disability is going to come into play in trying to be mobile.
How far did you go?
A kilometer, 10 laps. I usually, in the summertime I do more, but in wintertime the pool's not that warm, so it's about all my body can take is a half hour. So that's how long it takes me to do a kilometer. Not going to break any speed records, but it's a good workout for me. In terms of medical care, I don't really need any other than what a normal person needs. So, I mean, you know, annual exams, that kind of thing, I can easily get here. It's much more affordable, certainly, and it's like I was saying, for the medication I take for fatigue, I don't need to go to the doctor to get a prescription. I can just go to the pharmacy. Same with lab work. If there's any lab work I decide I need to have done, like for my thyroid, I can just go to the lab and tell them what I want. I don't need to get a doctor involved. And I know people that are, both sides of their body are affected and they can't walk, it's such a different experience. And some people are in a lot of pain. I don't really have a lot of pain. I've had pain in my knee lately, but that has to do with the way I walk. But there are people that are in a lot of pain, and it's a much harder road for them. The little pain I have had, I've had some insight. I'm a big believer in walk a mile in a man's shoes. So I think a lot of people have problems that I haven't experienced, and it can be a really difficult road to go down. If you have pain, I've had some pain lately, and I go, oh, it's much harder to have a positive attitude when you have pain, and it doesn't let up. It's a big distraction, but I just try to focus on what I can do, and the things I can't do, I don't tend to think about. There's still enough things I can do that I'm able to have a good life. So I think that's a big key, just focusing on what you can do. Don't think about what you can't do, because there's nothing you can do about it. So I think the main thing is you have to stay positive. My husband is very sweet and always says every morning I wake up with a smile on my face, and I do, because like I said earlier, I'm happy to have another day, and that's what I say to Peanut. Let's go out and see what's going to happen today. You know, you don't know. And that's another thing people used to tell me. You know, God, aren't you worried about your MS and what's going to happen to you? And I say, you know, I could worry about my MS, and then I could walk across the street this afternoon and get hit by a truck, and I would lay in the street going, oh, I should have been worried about getting hit by the truck. You know, so we all get something, and I don't think you should focus on or worry about what's going to happen in the future. Easier said than done, but I think you know, like always, we always say, you need to really focus on the present and enjoy life. And one of my, unfortunately, I don't remember his name. I think his first name's David. He has a website, and he says, you know, the main thing is we got to stay as healthy as we can, so when the cure comes, we're ready to slide right into it. So that's what I'm trying to do.